Óscar Arnulfo Romero y Galdames, the 15th of August 1917, the 24th of March 1980, was a prelate of the Catholic Church in El Salvador who served as the fourth Archbishop of San Salvador. He spoke out against poverty, social injustice, assassinations, and torture amid a growing war between left-wing and right-wing forces. In 1980, Romero was assassinated while celebrating Mass in the chapel of the Hospital of Divine Providence. Though no one was ever convicted for the crime, investigations by the UN-created Truth Commission for El Salvador concluded that the extreme right-wing politician, founder of Arena and Death Squad leader Roberto de Orbison, had given the order. During Romero's beatification, Pope Francis stated, his ministry was distinguished by his particular attention to the most poor and marginalized. Hailed as a hero by supporters of liberation theology inspired by his work, Romero, according to his biographer, was not interested in liberation theology but faithfully adhered to Catholic teachings on liberation and a preferential option for the poor, desiring a social revolution based on interior reform. Up to the end of his life, his spiritual life drew much from the spirituality of Opus Dei. While seen as a social conservative at his appointment as Archbishop in 1977, he was deeply affected by the murder of his friend and fellow priest Rutilio Grande a few weeks after his own appointment and subsequently developed into an outspoken social activist. In 2010, the United Nations General Assembly proclaimed the 24th of March as the International Day for the Right to the Truth concerning gross human rights violations and for the dignity of victims in recognition of the role of Romero in defense of human rights. Romero actively denounced violations of the human rights of the most vulnerable people and defended the principles of protecting lives, promoting human dignity and opposing all forms of violence. In 1997, Pope John Paul II bestowed upon Romero the title of Servant of God, and a cause for beatification and canonization was opened for him. The cause stalled, but was reopened by Pope Benedict XVI in 2012. He was declared a martyr by Pope Francis on the 3rd of February 2015, paving the way for his beatification on the 23rd of May 2015. Pope Francis canonized Romero as a saint on the 14th of October 2018. One of Romero's successors, the incumbent Metropolitan Archbishop of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of San Salvador, El Salvador, Archbishop José Luis Escobar Las, has asked Pope Francis to proclaim Romero a doctor of the Church, which is an acknowledgement from the Church that his religious teachings were orthodox and had a significant impact on its philosophy and theology. Latin American church groups often proclaim Romero an unofficial patron saint of the Americas and El Salvador. Catholics in El Salvador often refer to him as San Romero, as well as Monsignor Romero. Outside of Catholicism, Romero is honored by other Christian denominations including Church of England and Anglican Communion through the calendar in common worship, as well as in at least one Lutheran liturgical calendar. Romero is also one of the 10 20th century martyrs depicted in statues above the Great West Door of Westminster Abbey in London. Early life. Romero was born on the 15th of August 1917 to Santos Romero and Guadalupe de Jesus Galdames in Ciudad Barrios in the San Miguel department of El Salvador. On the 11th of May 1919, at the age of 1, Óscar was baptized into the Catholic Church by Father Cecilio Morales. He had 5 brothers and 2 sisters, Gustavo, Zeta, Romulo, Momerito, Arnaldo, and Gaspar, and Aminta, who died shortly after birth. Romero entered the local public school, which offered only grades 1 through 3. When finished with public school, Romero was privately tutored by a teacher, Anita Iglesias, until the age of 13. During this time Romero's father, Santos, trained him in carpentry. Romero showed exceptional proficiency as an apprentice. Santos wanted to offer his son the skill of a trade, because in El Salvador studies seldom led to employment. However, the boy broached the idea of studying for the priesthood, which did not surprise those who knew him. Priesthood. Romero entered the minor seminary in San Miguel at the age of 13. He left the seminary for 3 months to return home when his mother became ill after the birth of her 8th child. During this time he worked with 2 of his brothers in a gold mine near Ciudad Barrios. After graduation he enrolled in the National Seminary in San Salvador. He completed his studies at the Gregorian University in Rome, where he received a licentiate in theology cum laude in 1941, but had to wait a year to be ordained because he was younger than the required age. He was ordained in Rome on the 4th of April 1942. His family could not attend his ordination because of travel restrictions due to World War II. Romero remained in Italy to obtain a doctoral degree in theology, specializing in ascetical theology and Christian perfection according to Venerable Louis de la Puente. Before finishing, in 1943 at the age of 26, he was summoned back home from Italy by his bishop. He traveled home with a good friend, Father Valladares, who was also doing doctoral work in Rome. On the route home, they made stops in Spain and Cuba, where they were detained by the Cuban police, perhaps for having come from fascist Italy, and were placed in a series of internment camps. After several months in prison, Valladares became sick and Redemptorist priests helped to have the 2 transferred to a hospital. From the hospital they were released from Cuban custody and sailed on to Mexico, then traveled overland to El Salvador. Romero was first assigned to serve as a parish priest in Anamoros, but then moved to San Miguel where he worked for over 20 years. He promoted various apostolic groups, started an Alcoholics Anonymous group, helped in the construction of San Miguel's cathedral, and supported devotion to Our Lady of Peace. He was later appointed rector of the Interdiocesan Seminary in San Salvador. Emotionally and physically exhausted by his work in San Miguel, Romero took a retreat in January 1966 where he visited a priest for confession and a psychiatrist. He was diagnosed by the psychiatrist as having obsessive-compulsive personality disorder and by priest with scrupulosity. In 1966, he was chosen to be secretary of the Bishops' Conference for El Salvador. He also became the director of the Archdiocesan newspaper Orientation, which became fairly conservative while he was editor, defending the traditional magisterium of the Catholic Church. Episcopal career. In 1970, Romero was appointed an auxiliary bishop for the Archdiocese of San Salvador. In 1974, he was appointed bishop of the Diocese of Santiago de Maria, a poor, rural region. On the 23rd of February 1977, Romero was appointed Archbishop of San Salvador. While this appointment was welcomed by the government, many priests were disappointed, especially those openly supportive of Marxist ideology. The progressive priest feared that his conservative reputation would negatively affect liberation theology's commitment to the poor. On the 12th of March 1977, Rutilio Grande, a Jesuit priest and personal friend of Romero who had been creating self-reliance groups among the poor, was assassinated. His death had a profound impact on Romero, who later stated, "When I looked at Rutilio lying there dead I thought, if they have killed him for doing what he did, then I too have to walk the same path." Romero urged the government to investigate, but they ignored his request. Furthermore, the censored press remained silent. Tension was noted by the closure of schools and the lack of Catholic priests invited to participate in government. In response to Grande's murder, Romero revealed an activism that had not been evident earlier, speaking out against poverty, social injustice, assassinations and torture. In 1979, the revolutionary government junta came to power amidst a wave of human rights abuses by paramilitary right-wing groups and the government, in an escalation of violence that would become the Salvadoran Civil War. Romero criticized the United States for giving military aid to the new government and wrote an open letter to President Jimmy Carter in February 1980, warning that increased U.S. military aid would undoubtedly sharpen the injustice and the political repression inflicted on the organized people, whose struggle has often been for their most basic human rights. This letter was then sent, via telegram, from the U.S. Embassy in El Salvador to Washington, D.C. Carter did not directly respond to the letter. Instead, Cyrus Vance, the Secretary of State, wrote a telegram back to the U.S. Embassy. The telegram carried a very contradictory message, both stating that the United States will not interfere but will respond to the revolutionary government junta's requests. It is unknown if Archbishop Romero received the telegram. On the 11th of May 1979, Romero met with Pope John Paul II and unsuccessfully attempted to obtain a Vatican condemnation of the right-wing El Salvador regime for violations of human rights during the Salvadoran Civil War and its support of death squads, and expressed his frustration in working with clergy who cooperated with the government. He was encouraged by John Paul II to maintain episcopal unity as a top priority. As a result of his humanitarian efforts, Romero began to be noticed internationally. In February 1980, he was given an honorary doctorate by the Catholic University of Louvain. Statements on persecution of the Church. Romero denounced the persecution of members of the Catholic Church who had worked on behalf of the poor. In less than 3 years, more than 50 priests have been attacked, threatened, calumniated. 6 are already martyrs. They were murdered. Some have been tortured and others expelled from the country. Nuns have also been persecuted. The archdiocesan radio station and educational institutions that are Catholic or of a Christian inspiration have been attacked, threatened, intimidated, even bombed. Several parish communities have been raided. If all this has happened to persons who are the most evident representatives of the Church, you can guess what has happened to ordinary Christians, to the campesinos, catechists, lay ministers, and to the ecclesial-based communities. There have been threats, arrests, tortures, murders, numbering in the hundreds and thousands, but it is important to note why the Church has been persecuted. Not any and every priest has been persecuted, not any and every institution has been attacked. That part of the Church has been attacked and persecuted that put itself on the side of the people and went to the people's defense. Here again we find the same key to understanding the persecution of the Church: the poor. Popular radio sermons. By the time of his death, Romero had built up an enormous following among Salvadorans. He did this largely through broadcasting his weekly sermons across El Salvador on the Church's station, YSAX, except when it was bombed off the air. In these sermons, he listed disappearances, tortures, murders, and much more each Sunday. This was followed by an hour-long speech on radio the following day. On the importance of these broadcasts, one writer noted that the Archbishop's Sunday sermon was the main source in El Salvador about what was happening. It was estimated to have the largest listenership of any program in the country. According to listener surveys, 73% of the rural population and 47% of the urban listened regularly. Similarly, his diocesan weekly paper Orientation carried lists of cases of torture and repression every week. Theology. According to Jesus Delgado, his biographer and postulator of the cause for his canonization, Romero agreed with the Catholic vision of liberation theology and not with the materialist vision. A journalist once asked him, "Do you agree with liberation theology?" And Romero answered, "Yes, of course. However, there are two theologies of liberation. One is that which sees liberation only as material liberation. The other is that of Paul VI. I am with Paul VI. Delgado said that Romero did not read the books on liberation theology which he received, and he gave the lowest priority to liberation theology among the topics that he studied. Romero preached that the most profound social revolution is the serious, supernatural, interior reform of a Christian. He also emphasized, the liberation of Christ and of his Church is not reduced to the dimension of a purely temporal project. It does not reduce its objectives to an anthropocentric perspective, to a material well-being, or only to initiatives of a political or social, economic or cultural order. Much less can it be a liberation that supports or is supported by violence. Romero expressed several times his disapproval for divisiveness in the Church. In a sermon preached on the 11th of November 1979 he said, "The other day, one of the persons who proclaims liberation in a political sense was asked, 'For you, what is the meaning of the church?' He said that the activist answered with these scandalous words, 'There are two churches, the church of the rich and the church of the poor. We believe in the church of the poor but not in the church of the rich.'" Romero declared, "Clearly these words are a form of demagogy and I will never admit a division of the church." He added, "There is only one church, the church that Christ preached, the church to which we should give our whole hearts. There is only one church, a church that adores the living God and knows how to give relative value to the goods of this earth." Spiritual life. Romero noted in his diary on the 4th of February 1943, "In recent days the Lord has inspired in me a great desire for holiness. I have been thinking of how far a soul can ascend if it lets itself be possessed entirely by God." Commenting on this passage, James R. Brockman, Romero's biographer and author of Romero, A Life, said that, "All the evidence available indicates that he continued on his quest for holiness until the end of his life. But he also matured in that quest." According to Brockman, Romero's spiritual journey had some of these characteristics. Love for the Church of Rome, shown by his episcopal motto, "To be of one mind with the Church," a phrase he took from St. Ignatius' spiritual exercises, a tendency to make a very deep examination of conscience, an emphasis on sincere piety, mortification and penance through his duties, providing protection for his chastity, spiritual direction, being one with the Church incarnated in this people which stands in need of liberation, eagerness for contemplative prayer and finding God in others, fidelity to the will of God, self-offering to Jesus Christ. Romero was a strong advocate of the spiritual charism of Opus Dei. He received weekly spiritual direction from a priest of the Opus Dei movement. In 1975 he wrote in support of the cause of canonization of Opus Dei's founder, "Personally, I owe deep gratitude to the priests involved with the work, to whom I have entrusted with much satisfaction the spiritual direction of my own life and that of other priests." Assassination. On the 24th of March 1980, Romero delivered a sermon in which he called on Salvadoran soldiers, as Christians, to obey God's higher order and to stop carrying out the government's repression and violations of basic human rights. Romero spent the 24th of March in a recollection organized by Opus Dei, a monthly gathering of priest friends led by MSGR Fernando Sáenz Lacal. On that day they reflected on the priesthood. That evening, Romero celebrated Mass at a small chapel at Hospital de la Divina Providencia, Divine Providence Hospital, a church-run hospital specializing in oncology and care for the terminally ill. Romero finished his sermon, stepped away from the lectern, and took a few steps to stand at the center of the altar. As Romero finished speaking, a red automobile came to a stop on the street in front of the chapel. The gunman emerged from the vehicle, stepped to the door of the chapel, and fired one, possibly two shots. Romero was struck in the heart, and the vehicle sped off. Funeral. Romero was buried in the Metropolitan Cathedral of San Salvador, Catedral Metropolitana de San Salvador. The funeral mass on the 30th of March 1980 in San Salvador was attended by more than 250,000 mourners from all over the world. Viewing this attendance as a protest, Jesuit priest John Deere has said, "Romero's funeral was the largest demonstration in Salvadoran history, some say in the history of Latin America." At the funeral, Cardinal Ernesto Coripio y Humada, speaking as the personal delegate of Pope John Paul II, eulogized Romero as a beloved, peacemaking man of God, and stated that his blood will give fruit to brotherhood, love and peace. Massacre at Romero's funeral. During the ceremony, smoke bombs exploded on the streets near the cathedral and subsequently there were rifle shots that came from surrounding buildings, including the National Palace. Many people were killed by gunfire and in the stampede of people running away from the explosions and gunfire. Official sources reported 31 overall casualties, while journalists recorded that between 30 and 50 died. Some witnesses claimed it was government security forces that threw bombs into the crowd, and army sharpshooters, dressed as civilians, that fired into the chaos from the balcony or roof of the National Palace. However, there are contradictory accounts as to the course of the events, and one historian stated that, probably, one will never know the truth about the interrupted funeral. As the gunfire continued, Romero's body was buried in a crypt beneath the sanctuary. Even after the burial, people continued to line up to pay homage to their martyred prelate. International reaction. Ireland. All sections of Irish political and religious life condemned his assassination, with the Irish Minister for Foreign Affairs Brian Lenihan expressing shock and revulsion at the murder of Dr. Romero, while the leader of the Drogheda charity, Eamon Casey, revealed that he had received a letter from Romero that very day. The previous October parliamentarians had given their support to the nomination that Romero receive a Nobel Prize for Peace. In March each year since the 1980s, the Irish El Salvador Support Committee holds a mass in honor of Romero. United Kingdom. In October 1978, 119 British parliamentarians had nominated Romero for the Nobel Prize for Peace. In this they were supported by 26 members of the United States Congress. When news of the assassination was reported in March 1980, the new Archbishop of Canterbury, Robert Runcie, was about to be enthroned in Canterbury Cathedral. On hearing of Romero's death, one writer observed that Runcie departed from the ancient traditions to decry the murder of Archbishop Óscar Romero in El Salvador. United States. Public reaction. The United States public's reaction to Archbishop Romero's death was symbolized through the martyrdom of Romero as an inspiration to end U.S. military aid to El Salvador. In December 1980, the International Longshoremen's and Warehousemen's Union refused to deliver military equipment destined for the Salvadoran government. The leader of the union, Jim Herman, was known as a supporter of Romero and denounced his death. On the 24th of March 1984, a protest was held in Los Angeles, California, where around 3,000 people, organized by the 20th of November Coalition, protested U.S. intervention in El Salvador, using the anniversary of the Archbishop's death and his face as a symbol. On the 24th of March, 1990, 10,000 people marched in front of the White House to denounce the military aid that was still flowing from the United States to the El Salvadoran government. Protesters carried a bust of the Archbishop and quoted some of his speeches, in addition to the event being held on the anniversary of his death. Noted figures Ed Asner and Jennifer Casolo participated in the event. Government response. On the 25th of March, 1980, microsecond Secretary of State Cyrus Vance revealed that the White House would continue to fund the revolutionary government junta and provide military aid to them, in spite of the pleas of Óscar Romero and his death immediately prior to this announcement. On the 31st of March 1983, Roberto D'Aubuisson was allowed entry to the United States by the State Department after deeming him not barred from entry any longer. When asked about D'Aubuisson's association with the assassination of Archbishop Romero, the State Department responded that the allegations have not been substantiated. In November 1993, documents by the State Department, Defense Department, and the Central Intelligence Agency were released after pressure by Congress increased. The 12,000 documents revealed that the administrations of President Reagan and President Bush knew of the assassinations conducted by Roberto D'Aubuisson, including that of Óscar Romero, and still worked with him despite this. Investigations into the assassination. To date, no one has ever been prosecuted for the assassination or confessed to it. The gunman has not been identified. Immediately following the assassination, José Napoleón Duarte, the newly appointed Foreign Minister of El Salvador, actively promulgated a blame on both sides propaganda trope in order to provide cover for the lack of official inquiry into the assassination plot. Subsequent investigations by the United Nations and other international bodies have established that the four assassins were members of a death squad led by Major Roberto D'Aubuisson. Revelations of the D'Aubuisson plot came to light in 1984 when U.S. Ambassador Robert White testified before the United States Congress that there was sufficient evidence to convict D'Aubuisson of planning and ordering Romero's assassination. In 1993, an official United Nations report identified D'Aubuisson as the man who ordered the killing. It is believed that D'Aubuisson had strong connections to the Nicaragua National Guard and to its offshoot the 15th of September Legion, and had also planned to overthrow the government in a coup. Later he founded the political party Nationalist Republican Alliance (ARENA), and organized death squads that systematically carried out politically motivated assassinations and other human rights abuses in El Salvador. Alvaro Rafael Saravia, a former captain in the Salvadoran Air Force, was chief of security for D'Aubuisson and an active member of these death squads. In 2003, a United States human rights organization, the Center for Justice and Accountability, filed a civil action against Saravia. In 2004, he was found liable by a U.S. District Court under the Alien Tort Claims Act, ATCA, 28 U.S.C. paragraph 1350 for aiding, conspiring, and participating in the assassination of Romero. Saravia was ordered to pay $10 million for extrajudicial killing and crimes against humanity pursuant to the ATCA. He has since gone into hiding. On the 24th of March 2010, the 30th anniversary of Romero's death, Salvadoran President Mauricio Funes offered an official state apology for Romero's assassination. Speaking before Romero's family, representatives of the Catholic Church, diplomats, and government officials, Funes said those involved in the assassination, unfortunately acted with the protection, collaboration, or participation of state agents. A 2000 article by Tom Gibb, then a correspondent with The Guardian and later with the BBC, attributes the murder to a detective of the Salvadoran National Police named Óscar Pérez Linares, on orders of D'Aubuisson. The article cites an anonymous former death squad member who claimed he had been assigned to guard a house in San Salvador used by a unit of 3 counter-guerrilla operatives directed by D'Aubuisson. The guard, whom Gibb identified as Jorge, purported to have witnessed Linares fraternizing with the group, which was nicknamed the Little Angels, and to have heard and praised Linares for the killing. The article furthermore attributes full knowledge of the assassination to the CIA as far back as 1983. The article reports that both Linares and the Little Angels commander, who Jorge identified as El Negro Mario, were killed by a CIA-trained Salvadoran Special Police Unit in 1986. The unit had been assigned to investigate the murders. In 1983, U.S. Lieutenant Col. Oliver North, aide to then Vice President George H.W. Bush, is alleged to have personally requested the Salvadoran military to remove Linares and several others from their service. 3 years later they were pursued and extrajudicially killed, Linares after being found in neighboring Guatemala. The article cites another source in the Salvadoran military as saying, "They knew far too much to live." In a 2010 article for the Salvadoran online newspaper El Faro, Saravia was interviewed from a mountain hideout. He named D'Aubuisson as giving the assassination order to him over the phone, and said that he and his cohorts drove the assassin to the chapel and paid him 1,000 Salvadoran colons after the event. In April 2017, however, in the wake of the overruling of a civil war amnesty law the previous year, a judge in El Salvador, Rigoberto Chicas, allowed the case against the escaped Saravia's alleged role in the murder of Romero to be reopened. On the 23rd of October 2018, days after St. Romero's canonization, Judge Chicas issued a new arrest warrant for him, and Interpol and the National Police are charged with finding his hideout and apprehending him. D'Aubuisson and Linares are deceased, so they cannot be prosecuted. Legacy. International recognition. During his first visit to El Salvador in 1983, Pope John Paul II entered the cathedral in San Salvador and prayed at Romero's tomb, despite opposition from the government and from some within the church who strongly opposed liberation theology. Afterwards, the Pope praised Romero as a zealous and venerated pastor who tried to stop violence. John Paul II also asked for dialogue between the government and opposition to end El Salvador's civil war. On the 7th of May 2000, in Rome's Colosseum during the Jubilee Year celebrations, Pope John Paul II commemorated 20th-century martyrs. Of the several categories of martyrs, the seventh consisted of Christians who were killed for defending their brethren in the Americas. Despite the opposition of some social conservatives within the church, John Paul II insisted that Romero be included. He asked the organizers of the event to proclaim Romero, that great witness of the gospel. On the 21st of December 2010, the United Nations General Assembly proclaimed the 24th of March as the International Day for the Right to the Truth concerning gross human rights violations and for the dignity of victims, which recognizes, in particular, the important work and values of Archbishop Óscar Arnulfo Romero. On the 22nd of March 2011, U.S. President Barack Obama visited Romero's tomb during an official visit to El Salvador. President of Ireland Michael D. Higgins visited the cathedral and tomb of Romero on the 25th of October 2013 during a state visit to El Salvador. Famed linguist Noam Chomsky speaks highly and often about Romero's social work and murder. In 2014, El Salvador's main international airport was named after him, becoming Monsignor Óscar Arnulfo Romero International Airport. Sainthood. Process for beatification. In 1990, on the 10th anniversary of the assassination, the sitting Archbishop of San Salvador, Arturo Rivera y Damas, appointed a postulator to prepare documentation for a cause of beatification and eventual canonization of Romero. The documents were formally accepted by Pope John Paul II and the Congregation for the Causes of Saints in 1997, and Romero was given the title of Servant of God. In March 2005, Vincenzo Paglia, the Vatican official in charge of the process, announced that Romero's cause had cleared a theological audit by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, at the time headed by Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, later elected Pope Benedict XVI, and that beatification could follow within 6 months. Pope John Paul II died within weeks of those remarks. Predictably, the transition of the new pontiff slowed down the work of canonizations and beatifications. Pope Benedict instituted changes that had the overall effect of reining in the Vatican's so-called factory of saints. In an October 2005 interview, Cardinal José Sarajevo Martins, the prefect of the Congregation for the Causes of Saints, was asked if Paglia's predictions of a clearance for Romero's beatification remained on track. Cardinal Sarajevo responded, "Not as far as I know today." In November 2005, a Jesuit magazine signaled that Romero's beatification was still years away. Although Benedict XVI had always been a fierce critic of liberation theology, Paglia reported in December 2012 that the Pope had informed him of the decision to unblock the cause and allow it to move forward. However, no progress was made before Benedict's resignation in February 2013. Pope Francis was elected in March 2013, and in September 2013, Archbishop Gerhard Ludwig Müller, prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, stated that the Vatican Doctrinal Office has been given the green light to pursue sainthood for Romero. In 2014, Gregorio Rosa Chavez, auxiliary bishop of the Archdiocese of San Salvador, said that the beatification process was in its final stages. Basis for canonization. The Congregation for Saints' Causes voted unanimously to recommend Pope Francis recognize Romero as a martyr. He was killed at the altar. Through him, they wanted to strike the church that flowed from the Second Vatican Council. His assassination was not caused by motives that were simply political, but by hatred for a faith that, imbued with charity, would not be silent in the face of the injustices that relentlessly and cruelly slaughtered the poor and their defenders. To be beatified, a posthumous, usually an unexplainable medical miracle, verified by the prelate members of the Congregation for the Causes of Saints after an archdiocesan and Vatican-based medical and theological investigation, and signed by the Pope, must be attributed to his intercession, or alternatively he could be declared a martyr. In very rare cases, a pope could waive both of these requirements for beatification. Under dispute was whether his assassination was motivated solely by hatred for the faith, the requirement for martyrdom, or was influenced by politics, liberation theology, or by his vocal criticisms of the regime at the time during the Civil War. Beatification. On the 18th of August 2014, Pope Francis said that the process of beatification of Romero was at the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, blocked for prudential reasons, so they said. Now it is unblocked. Pope Francis stated that there are no doctrinal problems and it is very important that the beatification is done quickly. The beatification is widely seen as the Pope's strong affirmation of Romero's work with the poor and as a major change in the direction of the Church since he was elected. On Friday, the 9th of January 2015, an online news story article by Carol Glatz of Catholic News Service, CNS, stated that on Thursday, the 8th of January 2015, a panel of theologians advising the Vatican's Congregation for the Causes of Saints voted unanimously to recognize the late Salvadoran Archbishop Óscar Romero as a martyr, according to the newspaper of the Italian Bishops' Conference. It is a key step in his canonization process. Next, the cardinals who are voting members of the Congregation for the Causes of Saints in the Roman Curia must vote to recommend to Pope Francis that Romero be beatified. A miracle is not required for beatification candidates who the Pope decrees are martyrs to be beatified, as it would normally be otherwise. If he is not beatified as a martyr, a miracle will then normally be needed for him to be canonized. On Tuesday, the 3rd of February 2015, Pope Francis received Cardinal Angelo Amato, prefect of the Congregation for the Causes of Saints, in a private audience, and authorized the cardinal to promulgate, officially authorize Romero's decree of martyrdom, meaning it had gained the congregation's voting members and the Pope's approval. This cleared the way for the Pope to later set a date for his beatification. The beatification of Romero was held in San Salvador on the 23rd of May 2015 in the Plaza Salvador del Mundo under the Monumento al Divino Salvador del Mundo. Cardinal Angelo Amato presided over the ceremony on behalf of Pope Francis, who sent a letter to Archbishop of San Salvador José Luis Escobar Las, marking the occasion and calling Romero a voice that continues to resonate. An estimated 250,000 people attended the service, many watching on large television screens set up in the streets around the plaza. Canonization. 3 miracles were submitted to the Congregation for the Causes of Saints in Rome in October 2016 that could have led to Romero's canonization, but each of these miracles was rejected after being investigated. A 4th, concerning the pregnant woman Cecilia Maribel Flores, was investigated in a diocesan process in San Salvador that was opened on the 31st of January 2017 and which concluded its initial investigation on the 28th of February before documentation was submitted to Rome via the Apostolic Nunciature. The CCS validated this on the 7th of April. Medical experts issued unanimous approval to the presented miracle on the 26th of October, with theologians also confirming their approval on the 14th of December. The CCS members likewise approved the case on the 6th of February 2018. Pope Francis approved this miracle on the 6th of March 2018, allowing for Romero to be canonized, and the date was announced at a consistory of cardinals held on the 19th of May. The canonization was celebrated in Rome's St. Peter's Square on the 14th of October, 2018. Gloria.tv criticized Romero's canonization effort, saying that his biographer and personal secretary Jesus Delgado, who was instrumental in not only Romero's beatification but also his canonization process, was convicted and laicized by a Vatican court in December 2016 for molesting a girl. Previously there had been hopes that Romero would be canonized during a possible papal visit to El Salvador on the 15th of August 2017, the centennial of the late bishop's birth, or that he could be canonized in Panama during World Youth Day in 2019. Óscar Romero has the following characteristics. He is the first Salvadoran to be raised to the altars, the first martyred Archbishop of America, the first to be declared a martyr after the Second Vatican Council, the first native saint of Central America, although it is true, the St. Peter of St. Joseph de Betanzos did all his work for which he was canonized in the city of Santiago de los Caballeros of Guatemala and, therefore, also a Central American saint. His origins are in Tenerife, Spain, and sanctification on the part of the Catholic Church is not the first it has received, since the Anglican Church had already included it in its official saints, and the Lutheran Church had already included it in its liturgical calendar. Homages and cultural references. Institutions. The Romero Centre in Dublin, Ireland, is today an important centre that promotes development, education, arts, crafts, and awareness about El Salvador. The Christian Initiative Romero is a non-profit organization in Germany working in support of industrial law and human rights in Central American countries. The Romero Institute, a non-profit law and public policy center in Santa Cruz, California, U.S., headed by Daniel Sheehan, was named after Archbishop Romero in 1996. In 1989, the Toronto Catholic District School Board opened a secondary school in Toronto, Canada, named after Archbishop Óscar Romero. Romero Center Ministries in Camden, New Jersey, U.S., provides Catholic education and retreat experiences inspired by Archbishop Óscar Romero's prophetic witness. The mission of Romero Center Ministries is to seek personal, communal, and societal transformation by living ministry as proclaimed in Christ's gospel. The center hosts over 1,600 guests annually from high schools, colleges, and youth groups which participate in the Urban Challenge program. Television and film. The film Romero, 1989, was based on the Archbishop's life story. It was directed by John Dwigan and starred Raul Julia. It was produced by Paulist Productions, a film company run by the Paulist Fathers, a Roman Catholic society of priests. Timed for release 10 years after Romero's death, it was the first Hollywood feature film ever to be financed by the order. The film received respectful, if less than enthusiastic, reviews. Roger Ebert typified the critics who acknowledged that the film has a good heart, and the Julia performance is an interesting one, restrained and considered. The film's weakness is a certain implacable predictability. In 2005, while at the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism, Daniel Fried, an independent documentary filmmaker and frequent contributor to PBS and CNBC, made a 30-minute film entitled The Murder of Monsignor, which not only documented Romero's assassination but also told the story of how Alvaro Rafael Saravia, whom a U.S. District Court found, in 2004, had personally organized the assassination, moved to the United States and lived for 25 years as a used car salesman in Modesto, California, until he became aware of the pending legal action against him in 2003 and disappeared, leaving behind his driver's license and social security card, as well as his credit cards and his dog. In 2016, a 1993 law protecting the actions of the military during the Civil War was overruled by a Salvadoran high court, and on the 23rd of October 2018, another court ordered the arrest of Saravia. The Daily Show episode on the 17th of March 2010 showed clips from the Texas State Board of Education in which a panel of experts recommended including Romero in the state's history books, but an amendment proposed by Patricia Hardy to exclude Romero was passed on the 10th of March 2010. The clip of Miss Hardy shows her arguing against including Romero because, I guarantee you most of you did not know who Óscar Romero was. I just happen to think it's not important. A film about the Archbishop, Monsignor, The Last Journey of Óscar Romero, with Father Robert Pelton, CSC, serving as executive producer, had its United States premiere in 2010. This film won the Latin American Studies Association (LASA) Award for Merit in Film, in competition with 25 other films. Father Pelton was invited to show the film throughout Cuba. It was sponsored by ecclesial and human rights groups from Latin America and from North America. Alma Guillermo Prieto in the New York Review of Books describes the film as a hagiography, and as an astonishing compilation of footage of the final 3 years of his life. Visual Arts St. James the Greater Catholic Church in Charlestown, West Virginia is the first known Catholic church in the United States to venerate St. Óscar Romero with a stained glass window in its building. The project was led by the first Spanish priest of the Wheeling-Charleston Diocese, Father José Escalante, who is originally from El Salvador, as a gift to the Spanish community of the parish. John Roberts sculpted a statue of Óscar Romero that fills a prominent niche on the western facade of Westminster Abbey in London. It was unveiled in the presence of Queen Elizabeth II in 1998. Joan Walsh-Smith sculpted a statue of St. Óscar Romero at the Holy Cross College Ellenbrook, Western Australia in 2017. The sculpture depicts their college patron, walking his faith on his journey with the poor in El Salvador. Poetry and song. Romero's death is referenced in El Padre Antonio y su Monaguillo Andres, Father Anthony and Altar Boy Andrew, written and sung by Panamanian Ruben Blades. This song describes the arrival in a Latin American country of an idealistic Spanish priest, a fictional representation of Archbishop Romero, his sermons condemning violence there, his talks about love and justice, and, finally, the murders of the priest and altar boy during the Mass. Welsh singer-songwriter David Iwan wrote about Romero's assassination in the song, Óscar Romero. The 2012 special event album, Martyr's Prayers by the project, contains a track called Romero with lyrics consisting entirely of Óscar Romero's documented prayers. The accompaniment short film for the song uses footage issued by the University of Notre Dame, stewards of the documentary footage for Monsignor, The Last Journey of Óscar Romero. Christy Moore mentions Archbishop Romero in his song, Casey. Political writing. In their book Manufacturing Consent, 1988, Noam Chomsky and Edward S. Herman compared U.S. media coverage of the murders of Romero and other Latin American clergy in U.S. client states with coverage of the murder of Catholic priest Jerzy Popieluszko in Enemy, Communist Poland to explain their propaganda model hypothesis. See also: List of peace activists. List of unsolved murders. Misa camps in Nicaraguans. Bless Stanley Rother. Salvadoran Civil War Catholic priests assassinated in El Salvador during and after Óscar Romero's time as Archbishop, 1977-1980. RUTILIO Grand, assassinated the 12th of March 1977. Alfonso Navarro, assassinated the 11th of May 1977. Ernesto Barrera, assassinated the 28th of November 1978. Octavio Ortiz, assassinated the 20th of January 1979. Rafael Palacios, assassinated the 20th of June 1979. Napoleon Macias, assassinated the 4th of August 1979. Ignacio Martin Barro, assassinated the 16th of November 1989. Segundo Montes, assassinated the 16th of November 1989. Ignacio Ellacuria, assassinated the 16th of November 1989. Murder of U.S. missionaries in El Salvador on the 2nd of December 1980. 3 religious sisters and 1 lay worker. Colin Maura Clark, Mary Noel Jean Donovan, lay missionary Ida Ford, Mary Noel Dorothy Castle, Ursuline nun. References. External links. His page on the Catholic Hierarchy website, the official website for Archbishop Romero's cause for beatification, scheduled for the 23rd of May 2015. The Romero Trust CTU.edu, The Chicago area-based Catholic Theological Union's CTU Romero Scholars Program, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops USCCB prayer, composed by Bishop Kenneth Untenor of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Saginaw, for use in a 1979 homily by Detroit's Cardinal John Dearden for departed priests, but allegedly attributed to, but never spoken by, Archbishop Romero, can be used as a prayer for his cause or to him. The official YouTube channel for his beatification, a YouTube video called The Last Journey of Óscar Romero Super Martirio, a blog about the martyrdom of Romero, collection of Romero's homilies and meditations remembering Archbishop Óscar Romero, several contemporary and memorial articles. Article on Romero contains picture of Lent's icon, learned from history, 31st anniversary of the assassination of Archbishop Óscar Romero. The National Security Archive Romero, a description of the pursuit of justice for Óscar Romero. El Salvador marks Archbishop Óscar Romero's murder by the BBC News. How We Killed Archbishop Romero. Interviews with Captain Alvaro Rafael Saravia and others witnessing massacre of Romero's funeral. Video footage and pictures of the massacre in front of the cathedral. Foundation Monsignor Romero Foundation website. Westminster Abbey. Óscar Romero, Archbishop Óscar Romero, A Shepherd's Diary, Archbishop Romero's diary in English. It covers the time between the 31st of March 1978 and the 20th of March 1980. Romero's awareness of the historic importance of what was happening in the Church of San Salvador impelled him to maintain this other and more personal record of his pastoral activities. Literature by and about Óscar Romero in the German National Library Catalog. Óscar Romero in the Ecumenical Lexicon of Saints.